this KV-1, even at the closest ranges. Eventually, he managed to silence the steel monster as it swung its turret to take aim against him by the expedient of a well-aimed shot deliberately fired through the barrel of his opponent's gun. Men like Bix were part of a new breed of German tank commanders who achieved incredible victories against superior Russian forces. But these superior forces were now also armed with better equipment, and a deadly race would develop between the Russian capacity to manufacture more tanks against the Germans' ability to engineer better tanks. Although the German engineers would prove themselves winners, they were let down by their manufacturing capacity. The German war effort was being run inefficiently, and by 1942, Germany was being targeted by wave after wave of Allied bombers, which were reducing her war industries to rubble, while Stalin had wisely moved his factories back into the interior of Russia, out of harm's way.
They had managed to move out considerable elements of tank factories and aircraft factories. For example, the Kharkov tractor works, which produced tanks, they managed to get that out. The workers in that factory walked along the railway line under German gunfire to getting the trains to be moved out. They got the equipment out and they took the workers out. It was the largest industrial migration in the history of the world. Well over, I think it's about 1,900 plants were moved eastwards.
During 1942, the Red Army's armada of T-34s was growing ominously. New Russian tank armies were coming into being, and in the wake of the terrible defeat at Stalingrad, the German soldiers prayed for an answer. In the winter of 1942, the answer to their prayers was finally ready for delivery. It was the Panzer Kampfwagen 6, the Tiger.
Well, the Tiger I has got to be seen as a quantum leap in the progress of tank design. It appeared in 1942, and in one swoop, it doubled in armour thickness, doubled in weight, and doubled in gun power the might of any tank on the battlefield. It was really a terrific leap forward in tank design. Of course, in doing this, the Germans paid a tremendous price. The tank is so heavy that it made it difficult to control. You've got an engine which really isn't 100% powerful enough for the kind of weight it was pushing about, and they had a lot of technical problems just keeping it on the battlefield. So, for all their advances and their immense power, the Tiger was a terrific liability to its crew.
The Tiger tank had been developed in 1940 and 1941. Too late to benefit from all of the lessons from the Russian war, so it had the uncompromisingly flat armor at the front, which didn't deflect shots away from the vehicle. Sloping armor, like the T-34, would have been preferable, but the Tiger was so very heavily armored that even this problem was overcome. In fact, the Tiger was almost impervious to most Russian guns at all but the closest ranges, and it carried the deadly 88mm gun, then the best weapon on the battlefield. Inside his heavily armored turret, the gunner of the Tiger lined his target up on the middle triangle of his gun sight as the motorized turret effortlessly swung the gun into position. The maker's manual proclaimed that the 88mm gun was 100% accurate at ranges of up to 1,000 meters. On the battlefield, the Tiger soon proved its deadly efficiency. But there were never enough machines to equip all of the Panzer divisions. So the Tigers were organized into special heavy tank battalions called Schwerabteilungs, which could be rushed from place to place on the hard-pressed front, wherever they were most desperately needed. The highly efficient Nazi propaganda trumpeted the arrival of the Tiger, and for once, the results justified the rhetoric. Although only 80 Tigers had been delivered by the end of January 1943, already they were credited with over 400 kills. In the spring of that year, the Germans extended their use to North Africa, and the Western Allies grew nervous. In the space of just 2 short years, it seemed the Germans had evolved the ultimate battlefield weapon. To compound matters, no Tiger had yet been captured. That situation was to change early in 1943, when British forces fighting in Tunisia knocked out and captured this machine, which is currently undergoing restoration in the Tank Museum at Bovington.
The particular history of this one is that it was issued to the 501st Heavy Tank Battalion of the German Army and shipped to Tunisia early in 1943. It came up against 48th Royal Tank Regiment during the fighting in Tunisia, and 48th Royal tanks were then in Churchills, armed with a 57mm gun, which is against an 88 on this thing. But some fluke shot from one of the Churchill tanks actually struck the Tiger underneath its gun barrel, embedded itself in the turret ring, caused the crew to panic, leap out and abandon the tank. Now, that really is exceptional. Those tanks were so powerful they could have dealt with Churchills without any problem at all, way out of the range that the Churchills could fight back. The shot from the Churchill tank strikes the Tiger just underneath its gun barrel. Little gouge there, another one in the base of the mantlet, and then the shot buries itself in the turret ring of the Tiger, and it jams it. And that is enough to shake the confidence of the crew. Despite the thickness of armour, despite the size of the gun, they are actually nervous about being hit by another tank, and they abandon it. And that way, this perfect example of one of the strongest tanks of the Second World War falls into British hands.
In 1943, this object of fascination was studied by no less than Winston Churchill and King George VI. The tank was the subject of an urgent British Army study. Every inch of the Tiger was inspected, and a very concerned study team presented their findings. It was noted that the Tiger, with its heavy armor, dual-purpose armament, and first-class fighting ability, was basically an excellent tank, and constituted a considerable advance on any Allied tank. The study revealed its only real weaknesses were the limits imposed on mobility due to its weight, width, and limited range of action. But the study concluded that overall, the Tiger presented a very formidable fighting machine, which could not be underrated. There was more bad news for the Allies. In tandem with the Tiger, the German armaments industry had also been developing a new medium tank to match the T-34. It would be ready in 1943. Although they would not admit it, many of the features of the new Panzer Kampfwagen V, or Panther, were copied directly from the T-34. The Panther had the same sloping armor, wide tracks, and a similar 75mm gun. Developed with breakneck speed and rushed into production, the Panther made its debut at the Battle of Kursk before they were really proven. Engine and transmission problems abounded. Engine fires were commonplace. Dozens broke down, and some vehicles went into their first action pouring fire from the exhaust pipes. Not surprisingly, the Panther was a disappointment at Kursk. But once it had overcome its initial teething problems, the Panther would prove itself the best medium tank of the war. Indeed, it was a far better vehicle than the T-34, but again, the problem of short supply remained. It was never to be available in the quantities which the war in the East demanded. Although 6,000 would be built, that was never enough, as the numbers destroyed always kept pace with supply. The advent of the Panther and the Tiger represented almost the end of the evolutionary trail in World War II. German tank sizes had steadily increased, from the 6-ton Panzer I through the 22-ton Panzer III, and now onto the 62-ton Tiger. It would reach a peak with the 70-ton Tiger B, or King Tiger. The weight and superior armor certainly made the difference, but quality had been achieved at the expense of quantity, and it was quantity which Germany needed. It has been estimated that from May 1944 until the end of the war, on any given day, on average, only 400 tanks were available for action in the entire German army. The Allies could call on some 20,000. With this tremendous disparity in numbers, it has been estimated that in the East, the German tank divisions would have to have destroyed 10 Russian tanks for every one of their own which was lost.